like you lost another one.
Throughout history, culture have been subject to assimilation, conquest, and erasure. The American Indians who transfer into the black populations underscores the profound impact, such as being possessions of the corporate United States, right? The appropriation of cultural identity has been long used as a tool to subjugation and control, as dominant societies often relegate indigenous communities, whom is the black community, into margins, like redlining, of course, and erasing their contributions and relegating them to distorted historical narratives such as the transatlantic slave trade. By supposing that the American Indians are black, we invite critical reflections on power dynamics at play when a people's identity is taken far from them and bestowed upon another group. It forces us to confront the painful reality of cultural theft, where the narratives, symbols, and practices that were integral to a people's identity are absorbed and commodified by others, often stripping them of their meaning and historical context. Now, an instance of our identity being stripped from us and given it to another can be found in Congress. H.R. Bill 1385. Right in this bill, if you go to number 57, the Virginia Vital Statistics Bureau classed all non-reservation Indians as Negro, and it failed to see why an exemption should be made for the Wabanaks. Therefore, in 1925, the Indian Rights Association took the Wabanaks case to assist the Wabanaks in fighting for their recognition and the rights as an Indian tribe. In 59, we see during the Second World War, the Pamunkeys, the Mattaponis, the Chickahominys, and the Wabanaks had to fight the draft boards with respect to their racial identities. The Virginia Vital Statistics Bureau insisted that certain Indian draftees be inducted into Negro units. Finally, number 3, the Wabanaks were convicted of violating the federal draft laws and after spending time in federal prison, were granted a conscientious objector status and served out the remainder of the war working in the military hospitals. Now ask yourself this. Why did the government reclass a band of Indians as Negroes when beforehand they were Indians? And it appears the only way to be in a draft of the military during that time, I guess things changes over time. But during that time, you had to been classified, stripped of your nationality, and become a social status, such as the term Negro or Oriental or white. So there was a time before they became a status such as Negro, black, or color, where these peoples had nationalities. But where in law can we see that? Here we go. This is the bill right here, HR 6355, public number 175, 68th Congress. Tell y'all the details right here. And it says to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to issue a certificate of citizenship to Indians. And it says, be it enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that all non-reservation Indians born within the territorial limits of the United States be, and they are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States, provided that the granting of such citizenship shall not in any manner impair or otherwise affect the right of any Indian to tribal or other property. Again, non-reservation Indians. Non-reservation Indians. Who are you? What do your birth certificate say about you? What is on there? What is on there? We know what's on there. We know exactly what's on. So we're going to the Encyclopedia Virginia Humanities. The Code of Virginia as amended to adjournment of General Assembly 1930, page 26. And we're going to Title 5, Citizens and Aliens and Colored Persons and Indians. Citizens and Aliens, Colored Persons and Indians. And we're going to Section 67. And it says, every person in whom there is ascertainable any Negro blood shall be deemed, as Negro blood, we're going to know what a Negro is. Negro blood shall be deemed and taken to be a colored person. And every person, not a colored person, having 1/4 or more American Indian blood, what is American Indian blood? You're going to see. Shall be deemed an American Indian, except the members of Indian tribes living on reservations allotted them by the Commonwealth of Virginia having 1/4 or more of Indian blood, and less than 1/16 of Negro blood should be deemed tribal Indians, so long as they are domiciled on said reservation. So as long as you're living on a reservation, you're okay. You're okay. Right? Is that really the case? What's really going on here? Because they're living in a time where they can't measure how much blood that's in you. They wasn't doing no genetic testing. They wasn't doing none of that mess. They wasn't doing no forensic science. So they just going off speculation. Oh, your skin is so dark. It's too dark, so you're a Negro. But the term Negro is so broad that y'all don't understand. But this was the ideology of a racist man called Walter Plecker, because the reason they was doing this, they was trying to take your identity and take your land patents so they can build their corporations. So therefore, classification had to happen. But there was a way to make you say, hey, go on ahead and accept the title Negro in color, so you can certain benefits such as voting. The only way you can vote, you have to become a Negro. Do you see where I'm going with this? You have to fill out documents to say you was Negro. You had to first. Then they later on started doing it themselves. And they knew you wasn't going to change nothing about it because you was already so far gone in the sauce. But let's read the rest of this real quick. It says CSS 5099A. And it says, as the section read on the Code of 1887, persons having 1/4 or more Negro blood were deemed colored, while under the Code of 1924, every person having 1/16 or more of a Negro blood was deemed colored. You see how they kept changing it? They kept changing it over and over and over again. No forensic science, no true eugenics, no looking at DNA, none looking at that stuff, the real stuff for real. But just assuming someone's identity based on the color of your skin, and that's it. No real science applied, just racism. We're gonna put you in this thing called Negro and Black that has no ties to nothing, not even Africa, which they try to do today. But being Black does not tie you to Africa, because when you talk to somebody of the continent, they have tribes. They don't know no one that is Black. They make fun of you, right? The amendment of 1930 also added the last two proviso. In McPherson versus Commonwealth, 28 Graf, what's it say, 69, I think it says Virginia, 939, was held that a woman whose father was white, whose mother's father was white, whose great-grandmother was brown complexion, was not a Negro. In a sense, this section as it was in 1877. You see? It's just BS based off what your skin look like. And if you look at the Native Americans today, this is their ideology. Oh, you're a little bit too dark to be a Native. Oh, you're a little bit too light to be a Native. Oh, you just right. This is what we're dealing with today. Racism in 2023 based off skin complexion, not nationalities. They use race to trick you to get your true inheritance from you. Thus, the corporation's taking your shit. And they give you a color. And a freaking byword and a misnomer. It's crazy. And yet our people is proud of nothing. While the corporations sit up here and laugh at you. And clearly we can see right here in front of Google, if you type in Walter Plecker classified Indians, Walter Plecker classified Indians color, it says Indians reclassified as color as registered. Walter Plecker directed the reclassification of nearly all Virginia Indians, nearly all Virginia Indians as color on their birth and marriage certificates, because he was convinced that most Indians had African heritage and were trying to pass as Indians to evade segregation. But here's the thing. When you read the Racial Integrity Act, it don't say absolutely nothing about African heritage. Absolutely nothing. And we're going to tap into it. But I'm going to show you that American Indian or Indian means Negro too. So I'm going to show you that real quick. Right here in this book, The Facts on File Encyclopedia of the Word and Phrase and Origins, 4th edition by Robert Hendrickson. Right? Now it says the N-word, when used by white persons to describe a Black or African American persons. See, there's a difference between Black and African American. You'll see why they start calling you African American and start just calling you Black. But it says this is probably the most offensive, hateful, harmful term in the language today. Now you can see down here at the bottom, it says the N-word has also been an offensive derogatory term applied to Indians as well as blacks up until recent times. But you see it's interchangeable, right? Why was American Indians or Indians being called the N-word? You need to really think about that, right? So I'm going to show you how the word Indian, color, and Negro is all interchangeable together. We're going to this book right here, the American Historical Record, and it was in 1872, right? So let's head that way. We're going to go to page 531. I'm going to read down here. It says here, the terms colored persons, blacks, and Indians are synonymous. They all synonymous. Blacks, Indians, and the term color. It's right here. Talking about the 1800s. Then they later changed it. Also right here, again, in the trial Boston, 1824, 12 months, to show that the terms mulatto and Indian were synonymously used. All right, you see? They're interchangeable. Both these questions refer to a tux, who was called the same day both Indian and mulatto. So we're going to jump down right here. Read the rest for yourself. But it says the mulatto fellow in 1770 was justified by an act of incorporation which called Indians mulattoes in 1760. All right, so you see, and it says in the absence of other testimony, such evidence does not in the least prove him to be of African origin. So it doesn't mean the term Negro and the term mulatto doesn't really go back to Africa. It was later termed that. But I'm just showing you that it all means the same thing. Indian, mulatto, Negro, and color. They all meant the same thing. Same thing. We speak in 1824. We speak in 1760. And what else? Up to 1835. We know after 1835, that's when shit changed. Now this book right here is from a Native American. The modern Native American of today, right? It's by Jack D. Forbes. And it says, Africans and Native Americans, dodge the hijack, because we are the original people of this land. Y'all got to read this stuff with a grain of salt, because as you go deeper into history, you will find out that this African thing was not so, right? So let's go ahead to the page. All right, it says, as the reader will see, there's hardly a racial term which has a clear and consistent meaning over time and space. For example, the term Indian or Indio has been applied to many peoples, including the Indians of South Asia, as well as all groups in the West Indies, the Americas, and the East Indies, the Filipinos, Chinese, Japanese. The term Negro has been applied to black Africans. That's crazy how they say black Africans, but both of those are misnomers. The Indians of India, Native Americans, that's when we come into be. But like I said, you gotta dodge the hijack. Japanese and slaves of whatever ancestry. Black has been used for all the above, and for non-whites in general. And down here it says, by the way of illustration, in attempting to grapple with the problem of black African, they're going to misnomer, and Native American mixture, especially with the question to what extent African Americans. Look at all this misnomer. Why is he using these misnomers like this? It doesn't make sense. Why not stick with one? But it says throughout the Americas are part American Indian. See, Native American, American Indian, all this shit is different, people. All of it is different. When you intelligent when it comes down to these terms, understand where this shit came from, you will know all of this is misnomer, and you know that this, what you call Black African or African Americans, is really American Indian. So right here we got another one right here to show you that the term Negro or Nigger or whatever term you want to use, it applies by Black, or when using the term Black or whatever, it don't matter. It says being a dark-skinned person of sub-Saharan Africa, origin or descent, belonging or relating to a dark-skinned people of sub-Saharan Africa, origin or descent. Also occasionally designating any dark-skinned person. So it don't necessarily mean you're from Africa. It can also mean you're a different dark-skinned person from a different place, from a different continent, and so on and so on. The term Negro can also mean a person who does menial labor. Any person considered to be of low social status, derogatory. Then we got the term white nigger right there. I wasn't born to make an N-word of myself in a free country. Around this, yeah, you see all that right there. So the term can mean anything. It could be applied to anyone. So you see, just like in a Jack Corby's book, I just showed you that term can be applied to anyone, especially in the 1600s, and then mean just a black person, or what you call a modern black person of today, right? So right here, it says a dark-skinned person of any origin. A dark-skinned person of any origin. In early U.S. Used usually with reference to American Indians. Then we got the indigenous N-word right here. So you see, a challenge for any Native American. Show me any instance of the American government calling you an N-word on a document. Show me that. Or any type of document that shows the American government calling your seed line color for you non-reservation Indians. I would like to see that. If you cannot produce that, then I don't know what to tell you. But right here in 1994, it says a Tawny selling bombs, showing you that Tawny and the N-word is interchangeable together, because it's literally mean a brown-skinned person. A brown-skinned person, right? Now we're about to tap into the black codes, Negro codes, color codes, whatever code you want to call it. It's pertaining to black people, or what you call it, people of color. The reason we're about to tap into this because it's very, very important to use these things to identify what you are. There's a lot of secret gems in these documents to destroy all the mental barriers of today, because modernism has lied about a lot. And when we say modernism, we talking about the modernist people that believe in the education system, that have not taught the black codes properly, that have not taught racial classification properly, that have not taught historical events properly. So let's tap into that. This is the Negro Law of South Carolina, collected and digested by John Belton O'Neill, 1848. Here we go. Chapter 1, the status of the Negro, his rights and disabilities. Again, the status of the Negro, his rights and disabilities. Section 1, the Act of 1740, which is called the Negro Act. Section 1 declares all Negroes and Indians. Later on, you're going to see Negroes and Indians is practically the same thing. Free Indians in enmity with this government, Negroes and mulattoes and mestizos, who now are free except to be slaves. So he's saying they all to be slaves. Who's enmity towards this government? And we talking about the government of South Carolina. And it says the offspring to follow the conditions of the mother, and that such slaves are chattel personnel. Section 2. Under the provisions, it has been uniformly held that color is prima facie evidence that the party bearing the color of a Negro, learn how to decipher this shit. The party bearing the color of the Negro. What is the color of the Negro? You're going to see. Mulatto or mestizo is a slave, but the same prima facie result does not follow from the Indian color. What is the Indian color? What is the Indian color? We all gonna find out, right? Now, you already seen the little terms that I show in the beginning of this video, that American Indian and Negroes is the same thing. Like this definition right here. I told you it means the same thing. Well, let's move on. Section 3. Indians and descendants of Indians are regarded as free Indians in enmity with this government until the contrary be shown. Remember, how many of our people was claiming to be Indians? They knew that Indians was free, and they knew that their identity was being given to another, those that was supposed to relocate. And those that didn't relocate, the consequence to that was being classified as colored or Negro. But you see in this bill, this is the reason our people was saying that they were Indians too, so they can be free. Someone was just classified as Indians as well. But it's the hard truth. We had people from Africa claiming to be Indians so they can be free. And we had original Indians like you and I, who been classified as Negro, who were full-blood Indian that was supposed to be free, but they classified them anyways in order to take their lands. So to change their identity was the only way they can take their land. Just want to explain it to you, but it is the truth. We had different peoples claiming to be Indians, and the American government knew that they were Indians. If y'all understand, it's like a big mix-up. I don't know how I could explain it much deeper than that, but let's just say we had the Pacific Islanders, who were Negroes too, coming over here. We had Moors from Europe, Russia, and all these other places who was against the crown, who were claiming to be Indians. Then we had Africans who didn't want to honor their contract anymore, claiming to be Indians. Then we had the original people They all are Negroes. Indians still is Negroes. We had different types of Negroes coming over here to America that didn't want to do their work, claiming to be Indians too. So you see what the hell is going on, right? That's why I wanted to say that, so you can get the idea of what's going on. So in the second, I already read that. I read it again. In the second proviso of Section 1, right there, of the Act of 1740, it is declared that every Negro, Indian, mulatto, and mestizo is a slave unless the contrary can be made to appear. Yet in the same, it is immediately thereafter provided the Indians is enmity with this government, excepted in which case the burden of proof shall lie on defendant, which means they got to prove that this Indians or Indian has enmity towards the government, hatred or rebellion against the government. That is on the person claiming the Indian plaintiff to be a slave. And you see what's going on now. You have full-blood Indians. I'm talking about black people, right? Who were real Indians. Then you got other black people that wasn't really Indians from a different country that looked exactly like us, claiming to be Indian so they can be free. But they was going around lying on real full-blood Indians too, saying, hey, you're in rebellion against the crown. You're in rebellion against our government. So he a slave. And you know they believe the apprentice more than the servant, right? So like I said, y'all got to understand what the hell was really going on. This is how a lot of our people lost their identity, from lies of their apprentice. A lot of Indians was prisoners of war. A lot of Indians decided to work so they can earn their freedom because they got tired of fighting. This had happened. And again, all of these people were Negroes. Don't get it misconstrued. These people were not Mongolians or what you call mongrels. They were not these peoples. They became mongrel Indians, Mongoloid Indians, Native Americans towards the end of the 1800s. But before then, they were mongrels, they were Mongoloid, they were Mongolian. You know the story. But let us continue. Right? So, where I left off, where did I left off at? I'm treating this like it's alive. But that's what makes it real, don't it? Yeah, so basically the latter clause of the proviso is now regarded as furnishing the rule. The race of slave Indians, or of Indians, I thought that this word right here, I thought that was an S because in old books, that's what an S looked like. So I had to think on that. Or of Indians not in enmity to this government, which is the state is extinct. And hence the previous part of the proviso has no application. So you basically get what's going on, right? They said the race of the slave Indians. If all Indians is the same, why did they say the race of Indians or of this Indian or yada, yada, yada? The race of slave Indians. Why gotta be categories? Huh? Why can't you just say the Indian slaves, or why you gotta say the race of slave Indians? So this right here is going to give us the proper definition and legal terms of what a Negro really is inside of this Negro Act. So check this out. The term Negro is confined to slave Africans, slave Africans. So let's just say you get your genealogy and you see that your descendants, well, ascendants, are not slaves. What if? So let's just say you got nobody in your genealogy that wasn't slaves. Are you African? Because their definition of a Negro is confined to slave Africans. The ancient barbers. The ancient barbers. Who is that? And their descendants. It does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa. So if you are from Africa and free, don't matter what your skin color is, you're not a Negro. It's right here in the bill. Such as Egyptians, Moors, or the Negro Asiatics. See? You see? It's funny how they use the word Negro up here and say, oh, it's just Negroes are descendants of slaves of Africa. And they say Negro Asiatics, like the Pacific Islanders, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, those places like that. They're not Negroes, according to this bill. But I thought Negro had something to do with your skin color. So apparently it does not. This bill is contradictory. It is contradictory. But it says it right here. It says the term Negro is confined to slave Africans, the ancient barbers. And if y'all don't know that the Berbers, the Berbers were white people and their descendants. So we're going into the Slavs when we're talking about the Berbers. But it says it does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as Egyptians, Moors, or the Negro Asiatics, such as the Lascars or Lascars, however you say it. So you see right here, what is a Negro? So you see Negro isn't tied to skin color. It's tied to slavehood. Right. I don't know how many times I got to keep explaining this to people. Like, just because you call somebody a Negro don't mean they black. Negro means something else, and it don't got nothing to do with your skin color. So all of y'all out here calling yourself nigga, that comes from Negro, nigger. It goes back to that you basically just out here calling yourself a slave. And my ascendants are not slaves. Right? I don't know about yours, but I'm not a Negro. Just being real with you. And again, this topic can be sensitive to some viewers' ears. But if you wish to continue, keep on letting this video play. But let's go. Section 6. When the mulatto ceases, a party bearing some slight tint of the African blood. What is African blood and what is African tint? Because in the last one I just showed you, they said that the African slave is a Negro. And they start talking about the Berbers and all of them. We know that the Berbers is white. So what is African blood if they all were African? I told you there's a lot of conjecture, a lot of contradictions. But it says a slight tint of African blood ranks as white is a question for the solution of jury. So let's just talk about individuals from Papua New Guinea or the Australians. They're melanated. Some of them is darker than various people in Africa. So what the hell is African blood or African tint when there's different shades of melanated people that have the same shades as an African? Maybe the African have the darkest, but if you look at the people of the Sentinel Islands, they're very dark. The darkest I ever seen. So what is the African tint when you got all this conjecture around? It doesn't make sense. So I guess they just talking about dark, having severe blackness in the skin. I don't know if they're talking about brown like my complexion. I don't know if they're talking about severe blackness like someone from Kenya or Uganda somewhere, or Sudan, like dark like the Sudanese people. But I don't know. I wish they'd explained more on this, but they didn't. But it says a slight tint of the African blood ranks as white. So I guess if you're fair, which is yellow complexion, not white, yellow skin or a yellowish whitish color. We in our city we call them light bright. Ranks as white is a question for the solution of a jury. Basically like white passing. Mulattoes. Section 7. Whenever the African tint is far removed, which is, I guess, in a stance of albinoism, or they say far removed, which means completely gone, which means you gotta be white at that point. That upon inspection, a party may be fairly pronounced to be white. So if you come from, let's just say a melanin background and all your melanin is gone, they're gonna classify you as white, even if you come from a melanin background. So I feel like there's some more to this. And such has been his or her previous reception into society and enjoyment of the privileges usually enjoyed by white people. The jury may rate or regard the party as white. So it's up to a jury to determine if you are white when everybody can look at you. So what the hell do white really mean? So you got to stand before a jury, and a jury got to classify you as white and say, hey, his Africanness is so far gone, so now he's white. Do you see the bullshit? I'm sorry for those that don't like profanity, but I had to say it at that moment. Do you see the bullshit? I see what our ancestors was going through. Some of them being classified as white when they wasn't even white. People being classified as black when they wasn't even black. People being classified as Indian when they wasn't even Indian. Just switching up everybody's identity before a jury. I feel like you're white, so you're white. I feel like you're an Indian, so you're an Indian. I feel like you're a Negro, so you're a Negro. What kind of bullshit is that? Y'all see it? It's right here. You go before the jury at that time. This is what our ancestors was dealing with. So you go before a jury, and the jury tells you your classification. You're white, you're black, you're a Negro, you're an Indian, you're a mulatto, you this, you're that, even if you're not. So they could really fuck you over. Sorry for the profanity. Sorry for the listeners that's listening to this. I'm sorry. But that had to been utilized at that moment. This is how our ancestors got their land taken from them. This is how our ancestors became taxed citizens when we wasn't even supposed to be taxed citizens from the get-go. We wasn't even supposed to be citizens. So they classified you to tax you. And we all know that. For those of y'all that actually know real history, we all know that. Now we jumping down to section 8. No specific rule as to the quantity of Negro blood which will compel a jury to find one to be a mulatto has ever been adapted. What the? Listen to that. No specific rule, as to the quality of Negro blood, which will compel a jury to find one to be a mulatto, has ever been adapted. So they didn't have no formula. They was lookership. You look like a mulatto. We don't have no structure behind it. We just call you what we feel like. And that's that. And then this shit is adapted into society today. This is what the Native Americans do to us. You look like somebody from Africa, so you African. Look at your hair. Your hair look like an African hair, so you're African. Your nose too damn big, so you're African. Your eyes. Oh, those eyes of yours. They looking pretty African to me. That's some bullshit. This is what we going through today. We're going through the same thing what our ancestors went through. I'm sorry for the profanity. And then our people pick this mess up and truly believe that they are somebody from Africa, or they truly believe they are Negroes or niggas or whatever. They truly believe this stuff because of this ideology that was in court with no type of science, no type of structure behind it. It was basically, I feel like, so therefore you are. Here we go. It says between 1/4 and 1/8 seems fairly to be detachable ground. When the blood is reduced, they have no structure behind it, so I don't know why they talking about blood. Reduced to or below 1/8, the jury ought always to find the party white. Even though they ain't had no structure behind it. They just looked at you and say, you are African. You could be a descendant from Papua New Guinea. You could be a descendant from Aboriginal Chinese people. They're just going to look at you and say, you African. Darwinism, y'all. It says, when the blood is 1/4 or more African, the jury must find the party a mulatto. Unbelievable. This is unbelievable. Unbelievable. But this is the hard truth that we got to face about history. We're being misclassified, reclassified, classified over and over and over again with lookership. And that's the crazy thing about it. Section 9. The question of color and of course of caste arises in various ways and may in some cases be decided without intervention of a jury. And it says, as when a party is convicted and brought up for a sentence, or a witness on the stand objected to as a free Negro, mulatto, or mestizo, in these cases, if the color be so obvious that there can be no mistake about it, the judge may refuse to sentence or may exclude the witness. Still, if the party against whose color the decision may be made should claim to have the question tried by a jury, it must, I apprehend it, be so tried. You see this crazy shit? If the color be so obvious, so now color games to a continent. That's what it is. Color games. I told you, this is how they form their ideas. And the only reason DNA tests tell you you're from Africa, because of these old agendas, these old sayings, these old mindsets to keep the charade going. They know when they look back at this shit, they know this stuff is so ludicrous. It's asinine. It's crazy. Section 10. There are three classes of cases in which the question of color and of course of caste most commonly occurs. Prohibition against inferior courts or the tax collector. Objections to witness offered to testify in the superior courts. actions of slander for words charging the plaintiff with being a mulatto. So, actions of slander for words charging the plaintiff with being mulatto. So, if you go to freaking court, correct me if I'm wrong. So, if you go to court in those times and you say something out of line, that could classify you as a mulatto right then and there. Is that what I'm getting? So, action of slander for words charging the plaintiff with being a mulatto. So if you slander in those times, you could be classified as a mulatto. Correct me if I'm wrong, commenters. Correct me if I'm wrong. If make a video or something to correct me on it, if you know, but that's what I'm getting right there. That's what I'm getting. Section 11. In the first class, free Negroes, mulattoes, mestizos, are reliable to be tried for all offenses by a magistrate, and 5 freeholders, except in Charleston, where 2 magistrates must sit. And it says, and of course, any person claiming to be white, right? Check this out. Over whom, if that be true, they have no jurisdiction. So if you white, they don't have no jurisdiction over you, right? So that's when we start talking about common law. You're your own jurisdiction. You're sovereign, things like that in that nature. But look, you will see why some of our ancestors was going around calling themselves white. And I'm not just talking about the white passing Negroes. I'm talking about those that got my complexion and even darker. You get what I'm saying? There was birth certificates of people that have dark skin, but they were still labeled as white, and you need to know why. But look, it says charged before them criminally may object to their jurisdiction. And if they persist in trying him or her, apply for it, and making good of the allegation, is entitled to have the right of the prohibition. And it says, it seems if the party submits to have the question or jurisdiction tried by the inferior court, he will be concluded. So you see right here, you becoming white, or if you are white, they have no jurisdiction over you. And the only people that couldn't be white was descendants of slaves. And that, my friend, was broad. It just didn't mean Africans, right? So let's move on real quick, and I'm finna show you that that wasn't the case, right? We're going to this book right here, John Hawkins, University Studies in Historical and Political Science, Herbert B. Adams, the 13th series. There's multiple books on this, and over the time, we're going to cover all of them. But it says, white servitude in the colony of Virginia. Yes, this is a real history book, 1895. All right. The great body of service was comprised the former class. They were free persons, largely from England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, who wished to go to the colony as settlers to better their condition, but were too poor to bear the charges of their transportation. They consequently enter into a voluntary contract with anyone that would assume these charges and their maintenance for such a term of years as would repay the outlay, placing themselves for this limited time at the disposal of the person for any reasonable service. The agreement was by deed indented, and hence arose the term indented servant. When Lord Delaware came in 1610 with fresh supplies, he thoroughly organized the colony as a labor force under commanders and overseers. So again, who was the slave masters? Dale afterwards applied a rigorous military system adapted from the Low Countries and enforced it with great severity. In carrying out his plans for establishing new plantations, the colonists were marched to the daily work in squads and companies under officers, and the severities penalties were prescribed for a breach of discipline, of neglect of duty. A persistent neglect of labor was to be punished by the galley service from 1 to 3 years. And it says penal servitude was also instituted for petty offenses. They worked as slaves in irons for 10 years. Don't that sound familiar? We talking about pale skinned people coming over here being put into slavery. And once they did something wrong, they became chattel slaves. They was placed in irons for 10 years. And it says the planters affirmed that there were continual whoopings and extraordinary punishments such as hanging, shooting, breaking of the wheel, and even burning alive. But it is likely they much exaggerated the state of affairs. The system at least provided solitary. But like I said, they went through the stuff and they tried to put it off as, hey, they ain't go through it. It was exaggerated. What's your proof on it? Because at the end of that, there was nothing more than conjecture. Let's move on. Now we're going to the book White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. While the Spanish slaughtered in America for gold, the English in America had to plant for their wealth. Failing to find the expected mineral riches along the eastern seaboard, they turned to farming, hoping to make gold from tobacco. They needed a complaint, a subservient, preferably free labor force, since the indigenous people of America were difficult. Who were the indigenous people of America? Were difficult to enslave. They turned to their own homeland to provide. They imported Britons deemed to be surplus people, the rootless, the unemployed, the criminal, and the dissident, and held them in the Americas in various form of bondage for anything from 3 years to life. This book tells the story of these victims of empire. They were all supposed to gain their freedom eventually. For many, it didn't work out that way. In the early decades, half of them died in bondage. This book tracks the evolution of the system in which tens of thousands of whites were held as chattels, marketed like chattel, punished brutally, in some cases literally worked to death. For decades, the underclass was treated just as savagely as black slaves, indeed toiled, suffered, and rebelled alongside them. Eventually, a racial wedge was thrust between white and black, leaving blacks officially enslaved and whites apparently upgraded, but in reality, just as enslaved as they were before. According to the contemporaries, some whites were treated with less humanity than the blacks working alongside them. Again, Y'all gotta step away from these white and black codes, right? Because when they came here, they wasn't labeled as white and they wasn't labeled as black. Y'all need to get that understanding. This is a modern book. The only reason I brought this out is to show you that white can be anyone. White can be anyone. And the slaves were white, pale man, and black peoples too. White is nothing more than a status. They using this to paint a picture as the white people or pale man today is white, but they're really not. It was really just a status. That's why they was arguing in court on saying who is white, who's white, pull your jurisdiction that you're white. When they're looking at the individual, it wasn't just about skin color, people. I keep telling you, it wasn't about skin color. Remember, there's an agenda behind everything, right? There's a reason why they said you're free, or they allegedly made you free. It was all for capital gains. Because if it wasn't for this, most likely you would have been alleged servants, but you are still servants today. You are servants to the tax collectors. That is your new master, the tax collectors. Section 13, Negro Law in South Carolina, which is the Negro Code. In this class too, the tax collectors frequently issue tax executions, executions for capitation taxes against persons whom they supposed to be free Negroes. So if you're not free, you're not eligible to be taxed. Mulattoes and mestizos. And it says free persons of color, as they are sometimes loosely called, all collectively, mulattoes, mestizos, and Negroes. If the person or persons against whom they be issued be not liable to the tax, which means they're not free or they're white, they may, on suggestion, move for or have the right of prohibition. Prohibition. You know what the word means. No tax. Right? So you have to be a free person to be taxed. And there were people going around calling themselves white so they wouldn't be taxed. Are you starting to understand why people was going around calling themselves white too? For this reason. One of the reasons alone. Section 19. Now you finna really see, right? Free Indians. And again, what I showed you earlier, Negroes were Indians too. But we're gonna dive more into that. So you're gonna see the difference, right? Let's look. It says free Indians and their descendants unmixed by African blood. What is African blood? What is it? Do you have African blood just because you're a certain skin color? What is African blood? Are entitled to all the privileges of white men except that of suffrage and office. Do you see? Our people's going around saying we're Indian. We're full blood Indian. We're Indian. Yes, it's true Africans came here, but not all American Negroes mixed in with African Negroes. We all know this by now. When the colonizers came over here, they said they seen Negroes, but there was an African. And they sometimes can't even tell us apart. We're talking about other nations. Can't even tell the American Negro from the African Negro. So they just called them all Negroes in general and just say, oh, they all came from Africa. Which is a big conjecture. So you see why people's going around saying, hey, we Indians. We this, we that. For the benefit, the privilege of being a white man. The only thing we couldn't do was go into office. It says the former and the consequence, the latter, has been denied to a pure Indian. We know Dr. Walter Plecker. We're going to read what he did. We already read some parts of it. But we're gonna look at an article that showed what he was doing to the women and all them. Right after this. And it says, living among the whites. The foregoing principle resulting from the case cited in the margin is, I am persuaded, wrong. The term white, free white men used in our Constitution is a comparative merely. It was intended to be used in opposition to the colors resulting from slave blood. And again, what is slave blood? We already went over it. Go back in this video and you will see what slave blood is. I'm going to show you something else too regarding that slave blood. I know I was going to say I was going to bring up the Walter Plecker thing, but right after that, I'm going to show you. I'm going to bring up the Walter Plecker after this thing I'm going to show you. Right? So it said the case should be reviewed and I trust the decision should be reversed, for the case in which it was made will always condemn it. And it says the realtor, the Reverend John Mush was an Indian of the Pamunkey tribe. And I already showed you that the Pamunkey tribe is a group of Negroes. It's Negroes. Negroes, bro. I'm telling y'all. Black people. My skin complexion. They wasn't the Mongol man of today. Right? And it says he was a soldier of the revolution. He had as such taken the oath of allegiance. Basically became a traitor. He was sent out as a missionary to the Catawbas. Can't pronounce that Indian tribe. But they were Negroes too. He, however, did not reside among them. He lived among the white inhabitants of York District, where he had resided for many years. He was a man of unexceptionable character. Yet, strange to say, he was held not to be entitled to vote. Why? The only thing a pure Indian couldn't do was be in office and suffrage, right? And it says, if the decision be right, how long is this objection to prevail? When is the descendant of the Indian to be regarded as white? Is it that he is not to be regarded until a jury shall find him to be white? I'm telling you, they're just going around calling people white. It wasn't about your skin color, people. It wasn't about your skin color. You went beyond a jury. You went before a jury and they said, hey, I feel like you're white, so you're white. In some cases, this could be a Negro having a lot of money or a lot of land. And they said, hey, that's too much power. We gotta put you as white on these records, because it's impossible for a Negro to have such great wealth and acres and power and all these things. So you gotta be white. Sometimes that took place. Not just, matter of fact, not sometimes, a lot of the time, because we was rich people. Whether you know that or not, our ancestors was rich people. We had land. We had power, we had tribes, we had all this stuff. So they couldn't accept that. They said these people gotta be white. But the Indian blood, like that of the white, is the blood of freedom. Say it again. But the Indian blood, like that of the white, is the blood of freedom. Now you know what that blood is. There is nothing disregarding in it, and hence therefore the Indian and his descendants may well claim to be white within the legal meaning of our Constitution. Y'all better wake up, man. Wake up. So we go into this book right here, 1660. That's the year 1660 right there. As you can see, this is the book, right? And if you want these books, you can go to my Patreon. You could download these books. You just have to subscribe, because you never know when they're gonna, erase these books from online. So what I do is I download them, do my due diligence, and give them to you for just $3 a month. But let's go. I got something to show you. Now, some of these words right here I'm gonna butcher. Matter of fact, I'm not even gonna say. Some of them I might say. But y'all for to see who was on the west coast of Africa. Who was they picking up? From Senegal towards the north, we find Skambaya or Musmunda and Zanara and Havaya and Gomia, Guzula, Hia, and Sus, with others called the whites of Africa, who speak not Arabian, but use the tongue of the Sengay. I believe that's the Senegal or whatever, as they termed it. Likewise, the usual language in name and Numdia through the kingdoms of Turga, Guzaiga, Laminta. Look, all this stuff doesn't matter to what I was talking about. You can look at these countries right here, but all of this is West Africa. We talking about the alleged Nigeria, because there was no such thing as Nigeria during that time of 1600. But these are the kingdoms, and they seen white peoples. It was a lot of white people in West Africa. I'm talking about indigenous to West Africa. Again, who the hell was on those alleged slave ships? That's what I want to know. Because I keep digging deep and I'm finding that white people was in West Africa and they was being allegedly captured. I ain't saying there wasn't alleged Negroes too being captured, but they always want you to think it was black this, black that. It was only black people, Negroes. It was only the people of color. No, it wasn't. We had whites out of Africa being taken too. These are expeditioners coming through, seeing what they seeing. Now, if they taking white people from the British Isles and taking them to the American colonies to be servants, what makes you think they was going to take African whites too? The indigenous whites. And don't you dare come up here and say, oh, these are albinos. No, the fuck they wasn't. They would have said Albion. Right? I did the research. I did the due diligence. But there was something interesting I wanted to show you. Yes. Wow. Yes, there were white people in West Africa in the 1600s who wasn't colonizers. Expand your mind. They wouldn't slave their own, would they? Yes, the hell they would. So we're going to go to this documentary right here. It's basically a transcript of a documentary. But here it is right here. It's called Paper Genocide. All right. It says, long before the Indian women gave birth to a baby boy, Virginia branded him with a race other than his own. The young Manakan Indian mother delivered her son at Lynchburg General Hospital in 1971. So, this is about Walter Plecker, right? You want to see what he was doing. It says, proud of her Indian heritage, the woman was dismayed when hospital officials designated him as black on his birth certificate. They threatened to bear his discharge unless she acquiesced. I think I said it right. The original order came from Richmond generations ago. It says, Virginia former long-term registrar of the Bureau of Vital Statistics, Dr. Ashley Plecker, believed there were no real native-born Indians in Virginia, and anybody claiming to be Indian had a mix of black blood. We already talked about what black blood is. It's a descendant of a slave of Africa, and it don't necessarily mean that person is Negroid, right? So if you wasn't a slave of Africa, then you already know, right, that you can't be called black, but you could have the black undertone or whatever that they say. So let's read that part again. It says, Dr. Walter Plecker believed, that's conjecture, believe, uncertainty, there were no real native-born Indians. We know what the word native means. We're going to dive into it. Born Indians in Virginia. And anybody claiming to be an Indian had a mix of black blood. That's crazy, ain't it? But in aggressively policing the color line. And it says he classifies pseudo Indians. He called them fake Indians, right, as black, and even issued in 1943 a hit list of surnames belonging to the mongrel, we're gonna tap into that, or mixed blood family suspected of having Negro ancestry, who must not be allowed to pass as an Indian or white. So you see what Walter Plecker is doing, right? It says, what hateful language he denounced their tactics, like rats. When you are not watching, they have been sneaking in their birth certificates through their own midwives, giving either Indian or white racial classification. Why was our people putting white on their birth certificates? So this should speak a lot about your genealogy, my people. Those of y'all that's finding white in your background and you can't find no photo of these people being white, then the next census record you see them being a Negro, that should tell you, that should explain a lot to you. There were black people that look like me and you out here putting white on their birth certificates. But we already know they was official Indians, of course. But I digress. It says Plecker wrote 28 years later that the Manakan mother's surname still was on Plecker's list. She argued forcefully with hospital officials. She lost. Today, the woman's eyes reveal her lingering pain. She consulted with civil rights lawyers and eventually won a correction on her son's birth certificate. I don't think the prejudice will ever stop, said the woman who agreed to talk to a reporter only. Let's go. Where is it? Talk to reporter only. Reporter only on condition of anonymity. I think I said it right. And it says she waged a personal battle in modern terms in modern times against the bitter legacy of Plecker, who ran the Bureau from 1912 to 1946. A racial supremacist. Plecker and his influential allies, helped shape one of the darkest chapters in Virginia's history. It was the epoch of Virginia-sponsored racism. A physician born just before the Civil War, Plecker embraced the now discredited eugenics movement as a scientific rationale for preserving Caucasian racial purity. So you see why he doing this, right? You see why. He saw only two races, Caucasians and non-Caucasians. That's all he's seen. Caucasians and non-Caucasians. Now, it says right here, after helping win the passage in 1924 of a strict race classification in an anti-miscegenation law called the Racial Integrity Act, right? It says Plecker engaged in a zealous campaign to prevent what he considered destruction of the white or higher, who's the higher civilization, when he perceived Indians as threats to enforcing the color line. He used the tool of his office to endeavor to crush them and deny their existence. Many Western tribes experienced government neglect during the 20th century, but the Virginia story was different. The Indians were consciously targeted for mistreatment. Plecker changed racial labels on vital statistics to classify Indians as colored and investigated the pedigrees of racial suspect citizens and provided information to block or annual interracial marriages with whites. He testified against Indians who challenged the law. Virginia's Indians refused to die out, although untold numbers moved away or assumed a low profile. Now 8 surviving tribes recognized by Virginia in the 1980s were preparing to seek sovereign status from the U.S. government through an act of Congress. About 3,000 to 15,000 Indians counted in Virginia in 1999 census were indigenous to the state, expert says. As they bid for federal recognition, more Indians leaders were talking openly about the injustice of Plecker's era, right? And it talks about how he gave a hit list. If you have a surname in Virginia that's on Walter Plecker's hit list that was in that county, I would investigate that. If you find that on your genealogy, you need to be looking into that, because you might have ties to these various of Indians in Virginia. Now we're going to continue on the next slide. It says, "It is an untold story," said Oliver Perry, chief emeritus of the Nessamon tribe. "It's not that we're trying to dig him up and re-enter him again," said Gene Atkins, assistant of the chief of the Eastern Chickahominy tribe. "We want people to know that he did damage the Indian population here in the state, and it's taken us years, even up to now, to try to get out from under what he did. It's a sad situation, really sad," said Chief William P. Mouse of the Pamunkey tribe. "He came very close to committing a statistical genocide of Native Americans in Virginia." And when he said Native Americans, he's talking about the black ones, the American Indians, not the ones that portray themselves as the Indians of today. Chief G. Annie Richardson of the Rappahannock tribe, shout out to my tribe, speak bluntly. Devastation of the Holocaust genocide. Those are the words I would use to describe what he did to us. He said it was obvious his goal was the demise of all Native Americans in Virginia. We are not allowed to be who we are in our own country, right? And that's what it's like right now. As we being bashed up and down TikTok by other nations, we can't be who we truly are. The Manakins acknowledge the stigma and pain, the second-class status, the lack of economic opportunity, and the inferior education inflicted upon them and other Virginia tribes. Indian children were relegated to substandard colored schools. Their parents, waiting to keep an Indian identity, often declined to send them there. Some tribal children study in lower grades at reservation schools or church-sponsored schools like the one at Bear Mountain. Even in this history of oppression, some Manakins have found a common identity. It's a horrible thing what he did to the Indian people. Shield said to Plecker. But you know what? It gives me a sense of belonging because I'm grouped with my own people. It kind of backfired with Walter Plecker. He pushed the Indian people closer and gave us an identity. Look what they doing to us. Like I told y'all, the things that they're doing, the things that they did is gonna backfire because it's gonna expose our identity. Right? Her brother Johnny Johns is a tribal leader and an electrical technician. He's 51, enrolled at the Lynchburg College at midlife. He's been learning about the eugenics movement. Johns, whose surname was on Plecker's hit list, regards him in two ways. All right? Where we at? Regards him in two ways. I guess I didn't get that part. Did I get that part? No, I didn't. It says, I did. First, there's the horror, the terror. Yet he believes Plecker did us a favor because the list of Indian names is there. We know who we are. It's a two-edged sword, a duality. Manakan Chief Kenneth Branham, 47, remembers shunning by whites when Indian children were first allowed into public elementary schools in the 1960s. School bus drivers sometimes refused to transport them. Plecker was cruel, Burnham believes, but he kind of drew us together. We were a tight-knit group because there was nobody else we could associate with. His tribe, which has grown dramatically in recent years to about 1,100 enrolled members, is using federal grant money to document its history. The Manakins are making their comeback with people like Shields and Johns, who were drawn back from beyond Virginia to their family and tribal roots, the place they now call home. Okay, so y'all see right there. You see what's going on? So we're gonna read a little bit more. It says among them is an Indian activist, Mary B. Wade, who learned only in the 1980s about her Manakan heritage from an uncle in Maryland. So you see it spread. These same people left Virginia. Don't think that this tribe and all those people is just still there. Once these people couldn't be recognized, they travel. You can see this on your genealogy, people. We got a Manakan Indian in Maryland. They no longer, a lot of them is no longer in Virginia. So like I said, look in your genealogy, look up those surnames. If you see the link, you going to see that you probably was amongst these people, because we talking about over 15,000 people. And a lot of those people left. It probably was way more than that. But a lot of these people left. So y'all gotta understand, man. Gotta understand, your identity is out here. Don't go around thinking you just some N-word. Something more to your bloodline. They don't want you to know. It says now she's the secretary of the Virginia Council on Indians, a state government advisory panel. The Manacan tribe owns more than 100 acres on and near Bear Mountain and dreams of buying hundreds more, developing a retirement home and a daycare center. These Amherst Indians won recognition from the General Assembly in 1989, 5 years after Lynchburg pediatrician Peter Hunk laid out. Right? So y'all see, let's continue. Indian people of Amherst and adjoining Rockbridge counties were a special target of Plecker. He wrote in a 1925 letter, the Amherst Rockbridge group, of about 800 similar people are giving us the most trouble. Through actual numbers and persistent claims of being Indians, some well-meaning church workers have established an Indian mission around which they rally. All right. And it says across the state in eastern Virginia, home for tribes that once made up the Powhatan Confederation, Plecker evokes a diverse reaction from Indian leaders. He was just determined to get rid of us, said Chief A. Leonard Atkins, 73 of the Chickahominy tribe. And it says it was hard to believe that a man could do what he did and get away with it. A Chickahominy midwife was threatened by pay attention to this part, y'all. This is what they did. I didn't know I was getting to this part. But this is what they did to our ancestors, y'all. This is what they did to our ancestors. They was threatened. Some of them was murdered. Some of them went through the worst of the worst stuff. So let me show you. It says a Chickahominy midwife was threatened with imprisonment by Plecker if she didn't stop putting Indian on birth records, Atkins said. She decided to stop her midwifery rather than buckle under to him or risk a prison term. So our people was threatened. Our people was threatened with an imprisonment. All right. And it says during Plecker's era, a number of Indians didn't admit to their cultural heritage or pass down traditions to their children. It was easier for many to adapt to white society, said Chief Barry Bass of the Nansemond tribe. So you see what our people was doing? That was adapting. It was easier to adapt than to be at risk being thrown in prison for claiming to be an Indian. There's probably a lot who have gone to their grave who still didn't admit they were Indian. That's where it hurt, said Bass. The acting chairman of the Virginia Council on Indians, Plecker wrote in 1924 state published pamphlet, Eugenics in Relation to the New Family, that there were no true Indians in Virginia who didn't have some black blood. He later refined this to apply to native-born people in Virginia calling themselves Indians. His 1943 letter alluding to rats sneaking in their birth certificates claimed that mixed blood groups were intent above all on escaping Negro status. You see? And securing recognition as white. You see? They will let you know. With the resulting privilege of attending white schools and ultimately attaining the climax of their ambitions, marrying into the white race. Now, I have shown you a plethora of information that discloses what happened to the American Negro? How did we lose our identity? What's up with all these variations of the term Negro and Indian, etc., etc.? How did we came to the predicament that we are in today? You have learned what Walter Plecker have done, giving our identity to someone else, all for the sake of the white race, something that don't even exist, something that wasn't even here from the beginning. All for eugenics, all for the elimination of a people. You see that we became taxed citizens, but when we wasn't allegedly free, we wasn't taxed. And then once we became free, we wasn't taxed. The only reason they allegedly ended this chattel slavery in that form, but we know they switched it to the government, so they can tax us and do God knows what. I got a lot of information that I have to disclose to you in the next part. So I gave you a little bit of the information so you can know what we are dealing with right now. So I'm producing this information so you can expand upon it. Teach me something so I can learn more and I can build upon that too. Now, a lot of you know what's going on right now. They're trying to eliminate these books. They're trying to erase history way before we can even speak on it. They're scared of what we're going to stumble across. They don't care about what they did. They care about what we're going to find out. That's why they're trying to erase these books. For those of you that's seeking knowledge, that's searching for the truth, I had devised a plan where you can have access to these books. I made a Patreon, which ranges from $3 to $10 a month. That's a McDoubles meal. That's a $5 Cravens box at Taco Bell. Surely, if you could buy those things, surely you can spend it here on something that's very important for your people and the generations to come. If you wish to have this knowledge, these sources, before they take it down, if you wish to join my community, if you wish to have one-on-one conversations with me where I can help you with your genealogy, etc., then join my Patreon. Again, for $3 to $10 a month. It's still being built right now, but all of my sources will be uploaded to it before they eliminate it off the internet. Thank you. I'll see you in part 2, where we're gonna cover more proof that we are these people and show you what they did in history, etc., man. You're gonna love part 2, so hey, stay tuned. Thank you for watching.